The galaxy's greatest armada died in 4 minutes. 11 days later, humanity killed the god that destroyed it. Before we continue, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. I read as many comments as I can every day, and it's amazing seeing this community grow from every corner of the world. Thank you for being here. Now, let's continue. A shape the size of a mountain range slid through. A biomechanical dragon with an exposed ribcage, and inside that ribcage, spinning a small and perfect gravitational singularity. Its magnetic sails didn't merely disrupt the escort ships. They peeled the atmosphere off them, and thousands of soldiers froze in the silent dark before anyone could scream. The transmission cut to static. 2 hours later, in the sterile white rotunda of the Citadel Council, the recording looped to a halt. Overhead arrays flooded the chamber with hard, sourceless light, carving deep blue-black shadows under the eyes of 100 alien diplomats. The air stank of scorched wiring and too many species breathing too fast in a sealed room. The eastern fringe is gone, High Prelate Xyler announced, his voice flat with despair. The armada was vaporized in 4 minutes. Commander Vance, Admiral Valen, who had made it off the Solaris in an emergency pod, and whose crystalline skin still bore the healing amber seams of it, sneered down from the military tier. This is a council of the galaxy's elite. Your species has barely crawled out of its own solar system. Your ships burn chemical fuel and primitive fission. You have no standing to speak on cosmic extinction. Beside Vance, a sharp crack of knuckles cut the silence. Dr. Elisa Thorne stepped up to the brass railing, hazel eyes locked on the frozen hologram of the quartz serpent. Our primitive minds know how to read an energy signature, Admiral, she said, her voice dry as chalk. You call them gods. I call them an engine. You lost because you treated a predator like a battleship. You tried to trade plasma fire with something that eats thermodynamics for a living. And what would a human do, Doctor? Valen barked, leaning so far over the balcony that the crystalline plates of his forearms ground audibly together. Die more loudly? From the shadows behind Vance, a silhouette moved into the light. Sergeant Mackenzie looked like a walking bunker. His entire left side was encased in matte cybernetic plate, scuffed gunmetal under the white paint, humming with a low current you could feel in your back teeth. His scarred face was completely relaxed. As the diplomats shouted over each other, Mac leaned against a tactical console and began, softly, to hum. An old Earth blues melody. Slow, low, mournful, and so absurdly out of place in a room facing extinction that the chamber fell silent purely to figure out what it was hearing. Mac stopped, looked up at the Elythian admiral. We wouldn't die loudly, pal, he said. We'd make M choke on us. Enough of this primate arrogance. Valen turned to the High Prelate. We cannot spend resources on the Terran sectors. They are biologically suited to attrition. Julian Vance flipped the coin into the air. It flashed once under the overhead arrays and landed in his palm with a heavy slap. We aren't buying you ours, Valen, and we aren't evacuating. His voice dropped, went quiet and flat and immovable. The Earth Alliance Vanguard locked coordinates on Aegis Sector before this council convened. We've already taken your automated supply beacons. If your cruisers try for the core worlds, you'll find our ships sitting in the lane. The chamber erupted. Alien honor guards put hands on weapons. Mac didn't flinch. His cybernetic hand simply drifted to his side, and the humming resumed a fraction deeper, until the tone came up through the floor plates. Are you threatening this council, Commander? Xyler gasped, his skin fracturing crimson. I'm offering you a choice, Vance said, stepping toward Valen's pod. You can run into the deep and starve while those things pick you off one hull at a time. Or you can hand me your auxiliary fleets and watch how a species that actually knows how to bleed handles a predator. Valen stared down at the silver-haired human. For all his lineage and all his technology, what he saw in Vance's face frightened him worse than the thing that had eaten his flagship. It wasn't courage. It was a cold, total refusal to accept that the math had already been done. It looked like madness. You are walking into a slaughterhouse. Valen hissed and authorized the transfer. 4 hours later, in the war room of the Earth Alliance flagship Indomitable, the shape of the gamble finally came clear. The room was human utilitarian design at its most honest. White alloy bulkheads gone gray at the handrails. Cable runs bolted openly along the ceiling. A coffee ring on the tactical table nobody had bothered to clean. Through the observation windows, Aegis 4 turned below them. A bright silica desert world laced with rust-colored mineral veins. Thorn paced like something caged, cracking her fingers. The serpents are already tracking the energy wake of the Citadel retreat. They'll cross this sector inside 6 hours. If we don't blind their absorption arrays the moment they hit the upper atmosphere, they'll turn the surface to liquid glass with us standing on it. Then we let them think they've won. Mac dropped a portable shield generator onto the table. The white deserts of Aegis 4 did not look like a battlefield. They looked like an operating theater. Under 3 overlapping suns, the dunes glowed a pearlescent white so total that the Vanguard's augmented optics polarized to maximum and stayed there. The air came off the sand at 115 degrees, dry enough to crack lips inside a minute, and it shimmered so hard the horizon dissolved. Inside a command bunker cut into a sheer silica ridge, the air was cooler and worse. Rough pale stone, hastily bolted support beams, the smell of hot electronics and the faint animal smell of 200 people who had not slept. "They've entered the thermosphere," Dr. Elisa Thorne said. Her voice was far too calm, which was how everyone knew exactly how bad it was. Her hair had come loose and hung damp against her jaw. No insertion vectors, no deceleration. They're falling out of the sky like rocks. "Let 'em fall," Sergeant Mackenzie grunted. Max sat on an ammunition crate by the blast doors, his 6.5-foot frame throwing a long shadow across the floor, cybernetic shoulder plates drawing a deep vibrating note from the fusion bank behind him. Apocalypse notwithstanding, he was cleaning the optical lens of a plasma rifle with a small white cloth, rhythmic and unhurried, humming under his breath. "Mac, your shield lines overlap by under 3% at the apex," Thorne said without looking up. "If they focus refraction on that junction, thermal bleed-through liquefies everyone inside 5 kilometers in about 2 seconds. 3%'s plenty document." He paused the tune long enough to offer a jagged grin. "Don't need a wide door to keep a house locked. Just need to stand still in front of it." At the center of the bunker, Commander Vance watched through a horizontal observation slit, coin turning slow across his knuckles. "They're here," he said. The sky fractured. The first Verkalcon Apex Dreaddragon came through the cloud deck, miles wide, chitin fused to pale pulsing biomechanical muscle, ribcage open to the air. Inside it, a churning violet singularity bent the atmosphere into visible ripples. Its translucent solar sails caught the light of 3 suns and threw a shadow across the desert like an eclipse with intent. Behind it came the Seraphs, kilometers of living quartz, faceted, drinking the raw solar output of the system until they burned like small stars strung across the sky. "They're locking onto our heat," Thorne reported, her voice dropping. "The serpents are coiling. They're going to focus. Mac, hold the line." "Holding." Mac stood, slung the rifle across his cybernetic shoulder, and walked out into the glare. Through the slit, Vance watched 3 solar flare seraphs twist their bodies into alignment, quartz facets rotating with mathematical patience until the light of 3 suns converged on their scales. 3 lances of stellar fire came down out of heaven. "Shields up!" Mac's voice tore through the comms. Hexagonal barriers erupted from the silica ridges in a grid, and the generators hit a bass note so deep it came through the stone into everyone's ribs. When the lances struck, the world went white. The glare erased the horizon entirely. Outside, the top layer of the desert went from sand to a bubbling ocean of glass in under 4 seconds. Inside, the support beams groaned, and the fusion cells began to scream, warning lights strobing amber across every face in the room. "Integrity dropping 80-60, Thorne shouted, rerouting power with both hands. "Thermal loads too high. The junction is buckling." Under the sound of the lances grinding against the barrier, tearing metal layered over continuous thunder, there was something else on the open channel. Mac was still humming. He was out on the ridge at the manual override, cybernetic arm locked into the console, flesh hand braced against the kinetic backwash, teeth gritted, blood running freely from his nose in the pressure differential. Still humming. In the trenches, it landed like a hand on the shoulder. Their sergeant was humming a barroom tune in the middle of a solar apocalypse, which meant nobody had permission to die yet. Boots dug deeper into shaking earth. The line held. Thorn. Telemetry's locked. Vance flipped the coin, caught it, looked at her. Give them the virus. Thorn did not smile. Overloading their primary spectrum. She brought her palm down on the engagement key. Across the dunes, buried under the cooling glass, 100 frequency arrays, leviathan hardware, retrofitted in 11 hours by people who had never seen it before that morning. Fired at once. Not plasma. Not missiles. A single inverted resonance wave, tuned into the lattice of the quartz. For a second, nothing. Then the living engines of the Verkilcon met something evolution had never handed them. A forced kinetic feedback loop. The lead seraph scales stopped refracting. They began to absorb and could not stop. Its brilliant white glow curdled to unstable neon pink, then a screaming violet, and the creature began to writhe as its silent agony rolled through the atmosphere as pressure. Cascading, Thorn whispered. It can't dump the heat. There's nowhere for it to go. The seraph came apart from the inside. It didn't burn. It shattered billions of microscopic razor fragments raining across the upper atmosphere in a silver blizzard, and the shockwave threw the dread dragon off its descent vector and broke the coiling sequence of the two remaining serpents. The lances snapped out. The sky went back to hard trisolar blue. Outside, the desert was a smoking mirror, reflecting the wreckage of a god. The bunker was quiet. Somewhere down the trench line, someone was cheering. Thorn looked at the dead terminal for a long moment. Julian, he's not wrong. I know, Vance said. Outside, on the distant ridge, the apex dread dragon righted itself, and the violet core in its open chest began to pulse. Slower now. Deliberate. Learning. The glass planes of Aegis IV did not crack under the Verkilcon ground assault. They shattered into a storm of razors. Noon under 3 suns turned the battlefield into a furnace, and the mirrored surface threw the sky back at itself until heaven and earth blurred into one limitless white. In the primary trench, the air was thick with spent plasma and the heavy burnt musk smell of alien blood drying on hot glass. They've bypassed the perimeter grids, a comms officer shouted. Visual on bioforms in the low atmosphere. Those aren't ships, those are troops. Down through the silver blizzard of the dead seraph came the vanguard. Prism snakes first, 12 feet of reptilian horror with translucent scales that bent the solar light around them until they were nothing but ripples in the heat haze. Then the dread beasts. 6-legged, ram-headed, jaws unhinging to show rows of vibrochitin that went through mechanized plate like a saw through pine. And on the far ridge, anchored into the stone, the apex dread dragon. Its open ribcage pulsed violet. The singularity inside it was spinning faster, and across the battlefield loose glass, dropped rifles, and the bodies of the dead were beginning to lift off the ground and drift toward its open maw in slow, terrible silence. Firing the resonance array, Thorn said. Kneeling in a forward trench with her white coat gone gray with soot, she brought her hand down. Nothing. He swung his cybernetic arm in a flat, brutal arc, and the alloy fist caught the thing midair with a wet crunch that shattered its camouflage and threw it dead across the glass. He put a bolt of white fire through a charging dread beast with his flesh hand and never dropped the tune. Document. Mac's voice came over the channel. How thick is that ribcage? Thorn looked up. What? The dragon. The cage around the little black hole. It's open at the front. Everything else on this rock is armored. But that thing's got its chest hanging open because it needs to eat through it. Mac spat blood onto the sand. So it's got a hole in it. And we've got charges. There was a very long pause on the command channel. The pull at that range is 40 gravities, Thorn said quietly. Yeah, Mac said. So it's a one-way walk. I'll take volunteers, not orders. He got 11. He took 6 because 6 was what the cable rigs could carry. Corporal Odell Bray at point, because Bray had spent 9 years setting demolition charges in the tunnels under Mare Crisium and had never once been early or late. They went up the ridge on tethers into the gravity well, in full view of the trench line. Nobody spoke on the open channel. There was nothing to say and everybody was listening. At 300 meters, the tethers began to sing. At 200, Bray's team stopped walking and started falling upward, guiding themselves along the cables hand over hand toward the open ribs of a living mountain. At 100, the telemetry from 2 of the 6 went flat and did not come back. Bray's voice came through at 40 meters, thin and calm and very far away. Charges are on the containment struts, Sergeant. All 4. She's a beautiful piece of engineering, this thing. Real shame. Bray. Sergeant. A pause. Would you mind humming that thing you do? It's very loud in here. Max stood up out of the trench in full view of a battlefield and hummed into the open channel and did not stop until the charges went. The struts blew. The containment field around the singularity ruptured along one seam. Not enough to kill it, not remotely, but enough that the dragon convulsed and did the only thing it could do, which was vent. A jet of violently compressed spacetime tore out through the wound in its chest and the creature reared back to clear the discharge path, exposing the open cavity to the sky. Vance. Thorne's hands were already moving. It has to keep that vent open for 11 seconds or it crushes itself. 11 seconds, and the path runs straight up. Vance opened the channel to orbit. Valen. I am watching, human. The Elythian's voice was hoarse. I have been watching for 6 minutes. Your rail cannons can put a tungsten slug down that vent path before it closes. The atmospheric friction will destroy my firing arrays. A beat. You will now threaten to shoot me down if I refuse. Say it and be done. No, Vance said. Silence on the channel. You told us the weapon would only work once, Vance said. You were right, and I sent 6 people up that ridge to pay for the fact that I didn't believe you fast enough. One of them was named Odell Bray. He was 34. He let that sit. I'm not threatening you, Admiral. I'm asking you. You have 11 seconds. Valen fired in 4. 3 tungsten slugs the size of office towers came through the atmosphere at Mach 25, trailing plasma, and went into the open wound in the dragon's chest. Not into armor, not into a shield, but into a hole that 6 human beings had opened with their hands. The creature didn't explode. It simply stopped the way a building stops. Its ribs folded inward around the impact. The violet core guttered out to a dull, lifeless gray, and 11 million tons of biomechanical God came down on the silica ridge and did not move again. The gravity snapped back. Rivers of floating sand fell out of the sky in a crystalline downpour that lasted almost a minute. And then there was nothing but the sound of exhausted people breathing. Max sat down slowly on the firing step, laid his rifle across his knees, and looked at his hands. He wasn't humming. Vance came down the trench and stood beside him for a while without saying anything. 2 down, Max said eventually. His voice was wrecked. 2 down, Vance agreed. He looked up. Out past the dead thing on the ridge, past the 3 suns, the void itself had begun to darken. A shadow with no edges, sliding in from the deep. Reload the heavy cells, Vance said. The last one's coming. The sky of Aegis 4 did not burn. It went white and stayed there. The Verkilkon swarm mother came down like a continent that had learned to move. The terminal flared crimson. Valen, and behind him, visible through his bridge windows, 3 Citadel cruisers burning in a low orbit they could no longer hold. Vance. She has locked our hyperdrive signatures. We cannot break orbit. Our shields are failing under her thermal aura. His crystalline face was a mesh of fracture lines. For once, he did not demand anything. I have 4,000 crew. Tell me what you need. Stay out of the lane, Vance said. Everything's about to come through it. What is about to come through it? Vance flipped the coin, caught it. Thorne, cut the orbital feed. Mac, blow it. With pleasure, boss. Mac stopped every Citadel cruiser burning in orbit, and every listening post in a galaxy that had already written the obituary heard what he said next. This is Commander Julian Vance, Earth Alliance Vanguard, broadcasting in the clear. He held the copper coin up toward the descending god. You think you're the apex predator because you eat stars. We crawled off a mud ball that tried to kill us every single day for 400,000 years, and it never once managed it. We didn't survive by being smart. We survived because when something bigger tells us to bow, the horizon behind the swarm mother lit up. We bite its throat. It was not the sound of alien biology. It was 300 obsolete Terran mass drivers firing in sequence. The Earth Alliance home fleet had not come through the hyperlanes. It had left Earth 11 days earlier on a standing order. Vance had signed the night the first fringe colony went dark, and it had spent every one of those days burning chemical and fission engines past the red line, venting coolant, shedding non-essential mass, and it arrived exactly where Vance's vector correction had told it to arrive. At the head of the formation was the dreadnought Terra Firma, under Lieutenant Commander Imiko Reyes, running at 3% light speed on a locked collision course. Not automated, crude, 206 of them, who had known what the order meant when they read it 11 days ago and had ridden it all the way in anyway. A suicide run? Valen's voice broke across a bleeding audio channel, uncomprehending. They are ramming a leviathan. It's not a suicide run, Admiral, Thorne said into the comms, and her voice cracked straight down the middle. It's an eviction notice. The last transmission from the terra firma was 8 words long, sent on the open channel, in a steady voice. Aegis 4, this is Reyes. We have the door. She hit the swarm mother's central core at relativistic velocity. The flash turned the sky into a second sun and held it there for 9 full seconds. The pearl-white carapace didn't crack. It came apart, continent-sized plates spinning away into the void, and everything the creature had swallowed came back out at once. She died the way a star dies, in a slow cascade of iridescent light, and her shriek rolled outward across the system long after there was anything left to make it. Then the glare faded, and the light that replaced it was ordinary, warm, natural 3 suns over a desert. The sand settled. In the trench, Mac wiped the blood out of his eye, leaned on his smoking rifle, and after a moment began to hum. The same old tune, the same slow tempo. It wasn't mournful now. Julian Vance looked up at a clear sky, then down at the coin in his hand. He turned it over once. The face of old Earth was still legible under the scratches, worn but there. The dawn is ours, he said, and put it back in his pocket. 6 weeks later, the Citadel Council reconvened, and for the first time in 10,000 years the assembly floor was silent before anyone had spoken. High Admiral Valen took the floor alone. His crystalline skin had healed badly. The amber seams across his chest would never fully clear, and he had refused the procedure that would have hidden them. Let the record show, he began, that I called them primitives. He did not look at the human delegation. Let the record show that I proposed we leave the Terran sectors undefended and spend them as ours. Let the record show that at Aegis 4 I asked a human commander to sacrifice his ground generators so that this body might survive, and that he refused me, and that he was correct to refuse me. His voice did not waver. And let the record show that, when he needed my guns, he did not threaten me. He asked. He told me the name of a man who had died because I was right and he had been slow to believe it. His name was Odell Bray. He was 34 years old. The chamber did not move. We have spent 10,000 years perfecting the science of the acceptable loss, Valen said. They have spent 400,000 refusing to accept one. I do not know which of us is wiser. I know which of us is still here. He stepped back from the podium. We were wrong about them. I was wrong about them. Enter it in the record. In the gallery above, Commander Julian Vance listened to it all without expression. One hand in his pocket, a scratched copper coin turning slow across his knuckles. Across the galaxy, on 100 worlds, the species who had watched the feed from Aegis 4 had already arrived at the conclusion the record would take another year to formalize. Humanity was not a species you protected. They were the species you called when the gods themselves needed hunting.